Covered in wounds, orphan lion cub begged for help. What happened next will touch your heart. He was just a tiny lion cub, barely able to stand, his golden fur matted with dirt and streaked with fresh wounds. Alone on the edge of the savannah, his cries echoed into the emptiness, searching for a mother who would never return. Most would have walked away, believing the little cub had no chance of survival. But then something extraordinary happened. Someone stopped, someone listened, and someone decided that this broken cub's story was not going to end in tragedy. What followed is a journey of courage, resilience, and an unbreakable bond between a human rescuer and a lion cub who refused to give up. Through danger, heartbreak, and moment of pure triumph, this story will show you that even in the wildest places, love and compassion can change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more inspiring stories like this one. Stories that remind us of the power of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Now, stay with me until the end, because the way this lion cub's life was transformed will not only leave you in tears, it will also make you believe in miracles again. The dry season had stretched longer than usual across the African savanna. Dust rose from the cracked earth, and the once vibrant grasses now crumbled into brittle stalks under the relentless sun. Predators and prey alike struggled to endure, each day a battle for food, for water, and for survival. And in the middle of this harsh reality, far from the safety of any pride, a single lion cub stumbled to the dirt, his small body a canvas of wounds. His ribs showed with every shallow breath. His paws left faint trails of blood where thorns had torn into his pads. Flies gathered at the edges of his scratches, and his once golden fur looked dull, streaked with red and dust. He cried out again, a high-pitched, broken sound, not the roar of a future king, but the whimper of a child who knew he was alone. Somewhere, days earlier, something had happened. Perhaps poachers had struck, scattering his pride. Perhaps his mother had fallen in a hunt gone wrong. Whatever the reason, he was now abandoned. A cub too young to fend for himself, but too old to be easily carried away by scavengers. Hunger gnawed at his belly, thirst burned in his throat, and still he walked. Each cry was weaker than the last, yet still he begged, as though some part of him refused to surrender. It was in this state that John Matthews first found him. John was an American wildlife photographer who had spent years documenting Africa's wild landscapes and endangered species. His work had appeared in magazines and nature documentaries, earning him recognition around the world. But for John, photography was never just about the images. It was about stories. Stories of survival, struggle, and hope. On that hot afternoon, as he drove his old Land Rover along a dirt track near Tsavo, he was searching for elephants rumored to be passing through the area. What he found instead stopped him cold. At first, he thought the small figure ahead was nothing more than a scavenger bird bent over a carcass. But as he slowed and looked closer, he saw movement. Unsteady, faltering movement. The cub staggered into the middle of the track, its legs trembling like reeds in the wind. It collapsed onto the dust, too weak to continue, and lifted its head with a sound that pierced John's chest. He slammed the brakes, leapt from the vehicle, and rushed forward. For a moment, the cub tried to bare tiny teeth, a hiss of defiance rising from his throat. But the sound cracked and fell away, leaving only silence and exhaustion. John knelt down slowly, his heart pounding. The closer he looked, the more the sight tore at him. The cub's ears were torn, his flank covered with fresh cuts. His breathing was ragged, and his eyes, wide, amber, and filled with pain, seemed to plead without words. "Oh, God," John whispered, reaching for his water bottle. He poured a little into the cap and placed it carefully in front of the cub. For a second, the animal didn't move. Then, with shaking effort, he lapped at the water, each drop giving him just enough strength to keep going. John knew the rules of the wild. Intervention could alter nature's course, and rescuers were often warned against interfering. But this wasn't a distant cub fading unseen into the grasses. This was a life, right in front of him, reaching out for help. And John, with his camera slung uselessly around his neck, understood in that instant that this moment was not meant to be photographed. It was meant to be lived. He reached into his pack and pulled out a clean cloth, gently pressing it against one of the deeper wounds. The cub flinched but did not resist. "Easy," John murmured, his voice low and steady. "I've got you." The decision was made before he could even think it through. He couldn't leave the cub here to die. Yet as he lifted the small body carefully into his arms, he felt the weight of what he was doing. This wasn't just saving an animal. It was a promise that from this moment forward, he would do everything he could to give the cub a chance. The drive back to camp felt endless. The cub lay wrapped in a blanket on the passenger seat, his breathing shallow but steady. At one point, his tiny paw reached out, resting against John's hand on the gear shift. It was barely a touch, but John felt it like lightning. A connection had been made, fragile yet undeniable. When he arrived at camp, his fellow researchers and guides rushed to the vehicle. Gasps filled the air as they saw the state of the cub. "He won't make it," one muttered. Another shook her head. "It's cruel to give hope. He's too far gone." But John ignored them. He carried the cub into his tent, laid him gently on a bed of towels, and began cleaning the wounds one by one. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as though he feared breaking what little life remained. Hours passed in silence, except for the cub's faint breathing and John's whispered encouragements. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the cub stirred. His eyes opened wider, fixing on John with a look that was no longer just pain. It was trust. Weak as he was, he managed a sound, not a whimper this time, but a soft, rumbling purr. John froze, tears stinging his eyes. That fragile vibration carried more power than any roar he had ever heard. It was gratitude, fragile but real, and it bound him in a way no words ever could. As the sun rose, spilling gold across the camp, John leaned back and exhaled. He knew the days ahead would be filled with battles, against infection, against hunger, against doubt. But he also knew one thing for certain. He would not walk away. The cub had begged for help, and John had answered. Now, their journey together had only just begun. Yet somewhere deep in savannah, danger stirred. Hyenas prowled. Lions defended their territories, and humans with greed in their eyes still hunted under the cover of night. John had saved the cub from one death. But could he protect him from the world that waited beyond the camp? The morning after John had carried the wounded cub into camp, the savannah woke in a blaze of orange and gold. Birds called across the acacia trees, and the distant rumble of elephants carried like thunder. Inside John's tent, however, the atmosphere was still and tense. The tiny cub lay curled on a pile of towels, his sides rising and falling in shallow rhythm, as though each breath was a decision. John sat nearby, his eyes fixed on the little lion. He hadn't slept. Every hour, he dabbed the cub's wounds with antiseptic from the camp's first aid kit, whispering encouragements in the dark. Now, as the light grew stronger, he dared to hope. The cub had survived the night. That alone felt like a miracle. But not everyone shared his hope. Outside, voices stirred, his fellow researchers debating in hushed but urgent tones. "This isn't a house cat," one woman said sharply. "It's a wild predator. If it survives, it could kill him in months." Another voice cut in, softer but firm. "And what happens if it doesn't survive? We don't have the resources for this. We're here to study elephants, not nurse dying cubs. Let nature take its course." John clenched his fists. He had heard enough. He stepped out of the tent, exhaustion etched across his face, but his determination unshaken. "Nature didn't bring him to me," he said, his voice low but fierce. "He stumbled into my path. That means he's my responsibility now. If you can't help, at least don't stand in the way." Silence fell. The others exchanged uneasy glances. John wasn't a man who spoke often, but when he did, his words carried weight. They left him to his mission, though not without mutters about wasted time and dangerous attachments. Back inside, John crouched beside the cub again. The animal stirred, blinking open, tired amber eyes. John smiled faintly. "You're stronger than they think," he whispered, "and maybe stronger than I am." He offered a small bowl of milk, mixed with water and a nutrient solution. The cub hesitated, his nose twitching at the unfamiliar scent. Then, with surprising force, he lapped it eagerly, dribbling drops onto his chin. John chuckled, relief washing over him. That's it, little one. Drink. You're not done yet. For the first time since his discovery, John allowed himself to dream of possibilities. If the cub survived, what would his future hold? Could he be rehabilitated and returned to the wild? Or would his wounds and his orphan state bind him forever to human care? John didn't know, and perhaps the answer didn't matter. What mattered now was survival, 1 hour at a time. Over the next days, progress came in fragile steps. The cub began to stand for longer, his legs wobbling but determined. His wound scabbed over, though the scars beneath were clear reminders of the pain he had endured. Most of all, his spirit returned in small flashes. A curious paw swatting at John's shoelace, a soft rumbling purr when John scratched behind his ear. With every sign of improvement, John's bond with him deepened. He found himself speaking aloud as he worked, narrating his thoughts as though the cub were a companion. "We'll get through this," he'd say while cleaning wounds. "One day, you'll be strong again." And though the cub could not understand his words, his amber eyes never left John's face, as if he recognized the intent behind them. But hope always attracts obstacles. One afternoon, while John prepared supplies, a guide named Samuel entered the tent. He had been with the research team for years, a man respected for his wisdom of the land. His eyes fell on the cub, and he shook his head. "You are making a mistake," Samuel said quietly. John bristled. "He deserves a chance." Samuel stepped closer, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "A lion raised by humans will never truly be wild again. And if he survives, he will grow. His teeth will sharpen, his strength will rise, and his instincts will return. What will you do then, John? Cage him? Or risk your life to prove your love?" The words stung because they carried truth. John glanced at the cub, who was now clumsily batting at the corner of the blanket. He looked harmless, almost comical. But Samuel was right. He was not destined to remain small forever. John swallowed hard. "I don't have the answers yet," he admitted. "But I know this. Leaving him to die out there would have been wrong. Whatever comes later, we'll face it then. Together." Samuel studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "The bond you are building will change you. Be ready, because one day it will change him too." That night, John couldn't sleep. Samuel's warning echoed in his mind. He thought of other stories, cubs taken in only to grow into untamable adults. He thought of his own career, the risks to his team, and the weight of responsibility he had chosen. For a moment, doubt threatened to smother him. Then, as though sensing his turmoil, the cub dragged himself closer and curled against John's boot. His tiny body radiated warmth. His breathing, once ragged, now fell into steady rhythm. John felt the vibration of a purr against his foot, and suddenly the doubts eased. He didn't need to know the ending yet. All he needed was the courage to continue the story. Days turned into weeks, and the camp adjusted, reluctantly at first. The others stopped protesting once they realized the cub was truly healing. Some even softened, offering scraps of meat or taking turns refilling his water bowl. The cub, however, always returned to John, following him around camp with unsteady steps, his loyalty already fixed. John decided to name him Keone, a Swahili word meaning the one who sees beyond. It felt fitting, for this little survivor seemed to see through doubt and fear, straight into the heart of those around him. But just as hope grew stronger, new challenges approached. Poachers had been reported in the region, their snares and traps threatening every creature that crossed their paths. The research team debated moving camp, fearing both their safety and that of the animals they studied. For John, the danger cut deeper. Keone was too fragile, too inexperienced to face the savannah's threats. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John watched the cub playing clumsily with a stick, batting it with paws still wrapped in healing scars. He felt a chill, not from the night air, but from a realization. Saving Keone from starvation was only the beginning. Protecting him from the savannah, from predators, from poachers, even from the natural order, would test them both in ways neither was prepared for. And in the distance, as hyenas laughed into the dark and the drums of thunder rolled across the sky, John knew the storm was coming. Could one man's love truly shield a fragile cub from the weight of the wild? The weeks that followed brought change. The cub who had once been too weak to stand was now learning to play, his paws stumbling to the dirt with a clumsy sort of grace. His wounds, once raw and frightening, healed into scars that only told part of his story. Every day, John watched Keone grow stronger, and with each small triumph, the bond between them deepened. It was late afternoon when John returned from a short excursion, his camera slung over his shoulder. As he stepped into camp, he found Keone sprawled on his back outside the tent, batting at a butterfly that dared to hover within reach. The sight made John smile, a smile that came more easily these days. "You've got the heart of a lion already," he said with a chuckle, crouching to scratch the cub's belly. Keone purred in response, the rumble vibrating through his tiny frame. But for every moment of joy, there was an undercurrent of worry. The team had grown used to Keone's presence, but whispers still circulated. "What happens when he's bigger?" One researcher asked. "What happens when he's hungry for more than milk and scraps?" Another added, "He belongs in the wild, not here." John heard them all, but he refused to let their doubts shake him. He had chosen this path. By the start of the second month, Keone's energy was boundless. He chased shadows across the camp, tugged at John's boots, and even attempted tiny roars that came out more like squeaky growls. At night, he curled against John's side, his warmth a reminder of trust. For John, who had spent years living out of tents and lodges, drifting between projects and photographs, this was the first time he felt anchored. The cub gave him purpose beyond his camera lens. Yet the savannah has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One evening, heavy clouds gathered on the horizon, carrying the promise of rain. John busied himself with securing supplies when he noticed Keone stumbling strangely near the edge of camp. His usually lively steps were slow, his head drooping. Alarm surged through John. He rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "What's wrong, boy?" he whispered. Keone's body felt hot under his touch. His breathing was labored, and his once bright eyes were clouded. John's stomach dropped. He recognized the signs: infection. Despite his careful tending, one of Keone's deeper wounds must have festered unnoticed. Panic clawed at John's chest. In the wild, infection was often a death sentence. He scooped Keone into his arms, rushing into his tent. His hands shook as he pulled out the medical kit. He cleaned the wound again, applied stronger antiseptic, and whispered soothing words, though his own fear bled through. "Stay with me, Keone. Don't you dare give up now." The night was long and brutal. Keone shivered under the blankets, his small body racked with fever. John sat beside him, refusing to close his eyes. Every time the cub whimpered, John stroked his fur, murmuring promises. "You're not alone anymore. I won't let you go." By dawn, exhaustion pressed heavily on John, but he stayed alert. He mixed a solution of water, honey, and salts to fight dehydration, and coaxed Keone to drink. At first, the cub resisted, too weak to move. But then, with a flicker of will, his tongue touched the liquid. Relief surged through John like fire. Still, the days ahead were uncertain. Keone lay weak, his playful energy gone. The camp fell quiet, the team watching with somber eyes. Some urged John to let go. "It's cruel to drag it out," one woman said softly. John turned on her, his eyes blazing. Cruel? Cruel would have been walking away when he begged for help. "As long as he breathes, I'll fight for him." For 3 days, the battle continued. John barely ate, his entire world shrinking to the rise and fall of Keone's chest. Every flicker of improvement, a sip of water, a faint purr, felt like victory. Every setback sent John spiraling into despair. On the 4th night, as rain pounded against the tent, Keone stirred. Slowly, shakily, he lifted his head and let out a faint, broken roar. It was no louder than a cough, but to John, it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. Tears blurred his vision as he gathered the cub gently in his arms. "That's it, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That's my lion." The fever broke by morning. Keone's breathing steadied. His eyes regained their amber glow, and strength returned in small but sure measures. John felt the weight of fear lift from his shoulders, replaced by gratitude so overwhelming it left him trembling. From then on, John's protectiveness grew fiercer. He redoubled his efforts, keeping Keone close at all times. He built a small enclosure near his tent for the cub to play safely, shielded from predators and prying eyes. He adjusted his own routines around the animal's needs, feeding him carefully measured portions of meat as his diet changed. But while John focused on survival, others saw danger. Samuel, the guide, approached him one evening. His weathered face carried concern, not malice. "You saved him from death," Samuel said. "But what will you do when he no longer needs saving? You cannot hold him forever. He is meant for the savannah, not for this camp." John's chest tightened. He knew Samuel was right. Keone was not a pet, not a creature meant to live under canvas and ropes. He was a lion, destined to roam, to hunt, to rule. But the thought of letting him go felt like tearing out his own heart. One day, John admitted, "But not yet." He's not ready. And neither am I. As the weeks turned to months, Keone thrived. His roars grew stronger, his paws steadier. He played with sticks like toys, pounced on imaginary prey, and even attempted to stalk birds, though his clumsy leaps sent him scattering long before he got close. Watching him, John felt pride, but also dread. Every day brought them closer to the moment Samuel had warned about. And then came the night that changed everything. Hyenas. Their laughter echoed through the camp just past midnight, high-pitched and cruel. The researchers woke in fear, lanterns flickering as shadows moved beyond the perimeter. John bolted upright, his first thought not of himself, but of Keone. He rushed to the enclosure and found the cub pacing nervously, ears flat. The hyenas circled, their eyes glowing in the dark. Drawn by the scent of meat, they pressed closer. John grabbed a burning stick from the fire, shouting and waving it to drive them back. For a moment, they retreated, but only far enough to wait. Their hunger was relentless, and they had marked their prize. Inside the enclosure, Keone let out a roar, no longer a cub's squeak, but a sound that startled even John. It was raw, defiant, and brave. Yet his body was still small, his strength still growing. Against a pack of hyenas, he wouldn't stand a chance. John's heart pounded. He stood between the predators and the cub, fire in one hand, resolve in the other. He knew this was only the first of many trials. Saving Keone had bound their lives together, and now every thread of savannah was his battle too. The hyenas' laughter faded into the night, but John knew they would be back. And he knew something else. This journey wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about preparing Keone for the day when he would have to face the wild without him. And the question that haunted John as he watched the cub curl against him for comfort was simple, terrifying, and unavoidable. When that day came, could he let go? The savannah had its own rhythm. Fierce days, uneasy nights, and storms that arrived without warning. John had grown used to its patterns, but when danger came, it always came suddenly. For weeks, Keone had grown stronger, bounding through camp with playful energy, his amber eyes bright again. The little cub followed John everywhere, pouncing on his boots, curling against him at night, and greeting him each morning with that fragile, rumbling purr that had become John's lifeline. But joy on the savannah is never left untouched for long. The warning came in the form of Samuel, the guide, who returned one evening with a loop of cable in his hands. It was a snare, freshly set, the metal still bright where it had been twisted. "Poachers are close," Samuel said grimly. "If they're laying traps this near camp, they know we are here. They may be watching." John's chest tightened. He thought of Keone's healing paws, still marked by scars. He thought of the cub stumbling into one of those snares, crying out in pain, alone. "We'll pull them," John said, his voice tight. That night, as rain lashed the canvas tents, John's fear came true. He woke to the sound of Keone's cries. "Hi!" panicked. Nothing like the playful growls of the day before. He bolted upright, his heart hammering. Outside, the storm turned the camp into chaos. Ropes snapping, thorn branches whipping in the wind. The enclosure gate was still latched, but Keone was gone. Tracks led into the storm. Small paw prints pressed deep in the mud. John followed with a headlamp and shaking hands, rain blinding his vision. Then, in a flash of lightning, he saw him, the cub tangled near the dry riverbed, his foreleg caught in a snare. The The steel cable bit deep into his flesh, blood running down his leg, his body thrashing in terror. John dropped to his knees, mud soaking his clothes. "Easy, boy. Easy. I've got you." Keone hissed weakly but stilled at the sound of his voice. John pulled out his multi-tool and worked the blade under the wire. His palms slipped, the barbs catching his skin, cutting him open. He barely felt it. Each twist of the wire seemed endless, but slowly the pressure loosened. At last, the snare snapped free. Keone collapsed into John's arms, trembling, his small heart pounding against John's chest. Blood streaked John's hands, mixing with rain. In the distance, laughter echoed, high-pitched, cruel. Hyenas. Shapes move along the rim of the riverbed, their glowing eyes fixed on him, on the cub. The storm masked the scent of blood no longer. John rose, clutching Keone close. He reached for the flare in his pocket, yanked the cap, and a hiss of fire erupted, casting red light across the dark. The hyenas snarled, circling, but the flame in John's furious roar drove them back. He advanced step by step, shoulders squared, voice bellowing like something primal. Finally, the shadows peeled away, swallowed by rain. When he staggered back into camp, soaked and bleeding, Samuel met him with grim eyes. "It won't stop," he said. "Poachers, predators, they will keep coming. He cannot stay here." John laid Keone on a blanket and pressed his hands against the wound. The cub's eyes locked on his, glowing faint in the lantern light. The trust was still there, even through pain. It cut John deeper than the wire had. "We'll take him to the sanctuary," Samuel said quietly. "They can save him." John felt the words like stones. Sanctuary. It meant safety, yes, but it also meant separation. The cub would live, but perhaps not with him. He wanted to argue, to demand another way. But when he looked down at Keone, trembling yet alive, he knew love sometimes meant surrender. By dawn, the Land Rover was packed. John lined a crate with a towel that carried his scent, coaxing Keone inside. The cub resisted at first, crying, pawing at the door. John pressed his forehead to the wire. "I'll be with you. I promise." The road ahead was uncertain. The storm barely lifted, the world waiting with new dangers. But for now, John drove through the mud with one hand steady on the wheel, his other resting against the crate. Keone's purr vibrated faintly through the steel, fragile but real, binding them still. Yet one thought haunted John as the sanctuary gates came into view. Saving Keone had been his greatest fight, but letting him go might be the hardest battle of all. The sanctuary gates closed behind the Land Rover with a heavy clang, and John felt a shift inside him. He had carried Keone through storms, through snares, through fever, and through hunger. Now, for the first time, the cub's future rested in hands other than his own. The surgery was long. John waited in the corridor, pacing until the floor itself seemed to memorize his steps. When the vet finally emerged, her eyes told him everything before her words came. "He'll live. The leg will heal with care." Relief surged through John so strongly it weakened his knees. Then came the truth that hurt even more than the snare. But to give him a real chance at the wild, we must reduce human contact. You can't be part of his daily care anymore. John nodded, though his throat burned. He had known this was coming. Love meant more than saving. It meant preparing to let go. From a distance, behind one-way glass, John watched Keone in recovery. The cub lay in clean straw, his leg bandaged, his amber eyes still fierce even through exhaustion. Every so often, Keone lifted his head, sniffing the air as though searching. John pressed his palm to the glass and whispered what could not be heard. "Keep fighting, little king." The weeks that followed became a rhythm of hope. The keepers limited their presence, slipping food through chutes, never lingering. Slowly, Keone grew strong again. He learned to stalk shadows in the tall grass of the sanctuary's reserved pen, to crouch low, to wait before striking. Each movement told John that the cub was learning to be what he was born to be. Then came the day the panel of experts declared him ready for a soft release. The gate of his holding pen was opened. The savanna stretched wide beyond, and the choice was his. Keone stepped forward, paused, and turned his head once, as if listening for a voice that wasn't there. Then he walked into the tall grass, golden body swallowed by the wild. John's heart split open. He wanted to call out, to run after him, to hold him as he once had. But he stayed silent. That silence was his final gift. Weeks passed. The collar on Keone's neck sent signals across the sanctuary's map, each a heartbeat of survival. He hunted, he roamed, he rested beneath acacia trees. And then, one day, the signal stopped. Panic gripped John until the Rangers returned from patrol with news. The collar had snagged on a thorn bush, and Keone had slipped it off. He was out there, truly free now, answering to no one. Months later, John drove the western track of the reserve at dusk. The sun bled orange across the horizon, and shadows stretched long. That was when he saw him. A lion, full-grown, broad-shouldered, his mane just beginning to darken, stepped from the grass. Scars patterned his shoulder, the same scars John had cleaned with shaking hands months ago. Their eyes met across 20 yards of space. For a heartbeat, John saw not a cub, not a memory, but a lion who belonged entirely to himself. Keone gave a low, soft huff, the sound lions use for greeting, for acknowledgement without submission. Then he turned, joined by a sleek lioness, and disappeared back into grass. John stood alone, the air thick with silence. Yet he felt no loss. He felt completion. He had kept his promise. As the stars rose above the savannah, John whispered the words he had carried all along. Letting go is the only way to keep you. And somewhere out in the wild, a lion lived, not because he'd been saved once, but because he'd been loved enough to be set free. If this story touched your heart, remember that courage and compassion can change lives, sometimes by holding on, and sometimes by letting go. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes second chances matter.